Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Sirhan on X on this 22nd of October of the calendar year 2025. As I am live from Cincinnati, Ohio, in the United States of America, and as hoping everyone had themselves a wonderful day today. Colder weather is now starting to hit here in the Cincinnati area. Hoodies, long sleeve shirts, and for me, when the time comes, wearing the nice fancy suits. So hope everyone had themselves a wonderful day today. An historical moment took place in the history of Cincinnati sports. That will be the main event on tonight's show, as opposed to the usual, because it is deep in Cincinnati history, the greatest thing ever assembled in Cincinnati sports. That will be at the end of the show. But as usual, I touch, with it being Wednesday, I get started with the NFL and the Week 8 picks. And anything happens at this time of year. We know that. So let's get that out of the way. Let's start with what's going on in Minnesota. It is the Vikings and the Chargers. Question is, who is going to be the quarterback for these the Minnesota Vikings? Is it going to be Sam Darnold, or is it going to be back up here? I apologize. Who's it going to be? JJ McCarthy or Carson Wentz? It is going to be more likely Carson Wentz, because I don't know what Minnesota's problem with JJ McCarthy is. I mean, they have a stout defense that's rolling against a Chargers team who laid an egg, as we know, last week against the Indianapolis Colts on their home field. Not looking good at going into this matchup. And basically the criticism of Justin Herbert, which has been strong and somewhat warranted, got stronger again because he didn't play all that great, aside of 2 garbage touchdowns against the Colts this past Sunday. So we have a Thursday night matchup with some real intrigue. Maybe not what we had last Sunday night in Cincinnati with Pittsburgh and Cincinnati, obviously, because with the Joe Flacco story. But a lot of intrigue. I think this time around at home, I can't see the Chargers turn around losing twice at home. I know they have key pieces out of their lineup. I know Minnesota's quarterback is uncertain, regardless of that great receiving core they have of Justin Jefferson and Jordan, the drunk driver Addison. But do give me the Chargers at home. I think this one's going to be down to the wire. It's going to come down to Herbert or Wentz. I don't trust either guy in any situation, but just for this night only, I'm taking Justin Herbert and the Chargers. Now we go to the early slate games. The first one, of course, is Miami and Atlanta. Miami is just flat out throwing in the towel. Anybody with a brain knows this. Miami has just flat out thrown in the towel, and that's what you got now. And as a result, you're going to continue to throw in the towel. You're playing an Atlanta team who laid an egg at San Francisco. I don't see them laying an egg on a home field against a team that quit. I expect Bijan Robinson to run wild. Fantasy points for you Bijan Robinson owners out there. And I expect the Falcons to run all over the Miami Dolphins, and I think this one is going to be close. Because I'm surprised Mike McDaniel wasn't given the pink slip after the egg he laid the other day at the press conference after the last loss. And maybe it just says about the comedy of the ownership of the Miami Dolphins. And that's what you get. So Miami's basically thrown in the towel. Atlanta's still hanging in there in the NFC South with Tampa now. Tampa with all the key injuries. I'll touch on them in a minute. But give me Atlanta at home. Atlanta's going to win this one rather big going away. And, of course, it is the Bears and the Ravens. Lamar Jackson potentially back. Problem is still their defense is not all that great. But their luck at is the Bears' defense, although it's better, is not that much better. And the offensive line is just carrying Caleb Williams. That's what you have in that particular matchup. Baltimore knows a sense of urgency. I think they find a way to escape with a win, and not by much, because the defense still has all kinds of question marks all over the place. And now Marlon Humphrey, who wants to stick to podcasting, they basically didn't practice early today because he was ill. So that's what you had with that situation. But do give me Baltimore at home by hook or by crook, because that's what I think is going to happen. I'll touch on the Jets and the Bengals at the end of this pick segment because I have a lot to say about that. It's Buffalo at Carolina. No Bryce Young, which means a walkover for Buffalo. They know they laid an egg a couple weeks ago at home to the New England Patriots. They know they can't fall further behind in the standings because the Patriots have basically seized control for the half game plus the the 1-0 tiebreaker. Buffalo gets back in the winning track. They get this one on the road in Carolina against a Carolina team who's been competitive but doesn't really bring much. Buffalo wins this one big. It is San Francisco and Houston. San Francisco playing pretty darn well against a Houston team who still can't protect C.J. Stroud despite all the investments they made. Actually, their investments were so bad, they sent one of their top investments, Cam Robinson, out the door to Cleveland. And we saw what happens Monday night in Seattle. The same story, the same thing. And I expect that to continue this coming Sunday when they play the host of the 49ers. I expect San Francisco to handle business on the road against a Houston team who doesn't know where they're going. I don't even know if they have a direction of where they're going right now. So give me San Fran on the road on this one. It is Cleveland and New England. Patriots are just rolling. I know the Browns came off the big win over Miami, but as I said, Miami threw in the towel a few weeks ago, but that says nothing. Give me the Patriots at home, and give me them rather decisively at home. I don't think Mike Vrabel's going to let a rookie quarterback beat him on his home field, especially with the way Drake May has been playing as of late. Patriots win that one. Giants and Eagles, a rematch of that Sunday night upset in the Meadowlands a couple Thursdays ago. There won't be any upset this time. Philly gets their payback. They win this one big, especially after the collapse the Giants had at Denver this past Sunday, which created all kinds of chaos. And now we go back to what I was talking about with the Jets and the Bengals. A lot of people over here. Let me just start with this real quick. There's a lot of cowardice among Bengals fans since the win over Pittsburgh, and that's still ongoing. You better hope you beat the Jets this coming Sunday, because that cowardice is going to be egg all over your face, because how you guys have conducted yourselves since the win over Pittsburgh, like this biggest group of low-life cowards walking God's green earth. And I'll say this also. After I said this when I left the game, anybody see me carry myself the way you guys do on the internet? Because I know there's a bigger picture to fry. The second my 2 feet stepped out of that stadium, I was focused on what's coming up Sunday. We have too many cowards in the Bengals community, among the Bengals fans in the Cincinnati media, who are resorting to slandering Steelers fans still, and still act like beating the Steelers this last Thursday was the greatest thing they ever saw since sliced bread. And it was not. You're still 3-4, as Bill Parcells will eloquently say. You are what your record says you are, and you better hope you can turn around and beat the Jets this coming Sunday, because if you don't, it will be 10 times the embarrassment losing week 1 to New England was last year. And the way you guys have conducted yourselves like cowards since beating the Pittsburgh Steelers this past Thursday with acting like it's the greatest thing you ever saw when it's basically an irrelevant win, you're fixing for an L. But you're going to find a way to win. But conducting yourselves the way you guys conducted yourselves since beating the Pittsburgh Steelers Thursday night isn't the way to go. There's a reason why I stay in my lane, why you guys carry yourselves like the biggest group of, D-bags across, Cincinnati and the online waves. I mean, my 2 eyes have seen it. You better hope you beat the Jets. I expect a letdown game, because we know the Jets, their energy it's like the equivalent of trying to drive a car with 4 flat tires and no air. I mean, you can't even put air in the tires of the New York Jets right now. They're that flat. If you don't beat the Jets at that rate, I don't want to be you guys after the way you've conducted yourselves over the past 10 days, because you guys are just a walking embarrassment. But you guys are going to win this coming Sunday. Doesn't matter who the Jets put at quarterback. That's what I have to say about that. Just quit carrying yourselves like cowards. The Steeler game is over. Quit slandering Steelers fans, because you guys make yourselves look like douchebags. And as a result, if you guys lose to the Jets, you're going to get an embarrassment. But the Bengals will win Sunday. So that takes care of the early games. Now we're going to go to the late game slate, the 4 o'clock slate. Start with this one, of course, is Tampa Bay and New Orleans. Tampa Bay, of course, missing pieces all over the place. No Mike Evans, no Chris Godwin. I mean, still have Emeka Egbuka and Cade Otton. I'm sure they'll find another piece or two in there, because Tampa Bay is starting to get beat up a little bit. But your luck out this week is you're playing a Saints team who's just offering nothing. I think it'll be a closer than expected battle, but it's going to come down to Baker Mayfield against whoever the frick's going to be the quarterback for the Saints. And give me Baker Mayfield and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers on that one. Tennessee and Indy. It's an expected Indy wipeout. they're rolling right now. I mean, they might roll to that big game coming up in a couple of weeks at Kansas City, which is setting up to be a doozy. But they're rolling right now. They keep rolling. They hammer the Titans. This one I don't think will be close. It's the Cowboys and the Broncos, the game of the week. Lots of places I can go with this. It's the proverbial offense versus defense, strength versus strength. The Cowboys offense versus the Broncos defense. And we know the Dallas defense is so bad, they can't stop an offense with 11 statues. That's how bad Dallas's defense is. But the Broncos offense leaves plenty to be desired themselves. And I know they had a great comeback against the Giants, but the Giants just basically quit. That's what happened. But on this particular game, who do you trust more? Of course, they just got CeeDee Lamb back in Dallas, so that's a big plus for Dallas. And you already have George Pickens on the other side. This one has the makings of a shootout, but give me Dallas on the road. If we talk about the two quarterbacks who I trust more, it's Dak Prescott. I really trust neither of these two because one hasn't been man enough to lead his team to an NFC Conference Championship game appearance, while the other one is just regress in a sophomore year. But give me Dallas on the road. And the Sunday night tilt in Pittsburgh, we know what this one is. It's Aaron Rodgers versus his former team, the Packers and the Steelers. Steelers defense, just got lit up by Ja'Marr Chase and Noah Fant and Joe Flacco. And I expect Jordan Love to pick that up where I left off. I think the Pittsburgh defense will play much better. I think the Pittsburgh offense will play better with Aaron Rodgers because he's going to be more motivated to get a win against his former team. But Green Bay is still going to be a bit too much. Give me the Packers in Pittsburgh Sunday night. And I think that will be a good one. It's going to be a lot of interesting storylines, a lot of directions you can go. But I think Green Bay just brings a little more to the table. And after everything that's how they looked the last 3 weeks against Dallas, Cincinnati, and Arizona, I think they're due for a big win to show the world they're legit. They do it here Sunday night in Pittsburgh. And the Monday night game is Kansas versus Washington. No Jaden Daniels, and they're going to have Marcus Mariota. But right now, Patrick Mahomes is cooking, and it's like he's going to march his way to another MVP at this rate. He got Rashee Rice back, and of course, Xavier Worthy and Travis Kelce, and the weapons are there. Defense looks solid. Everything looks good over there in Kansas City after they just put the brakes to the Lions 2 weeks ago and goose-egged the Las Vegas Raiders. That continues. Kansas City wins this one big. They're just rolling, and I expect Mahomes to roll his way to an MVP award at this rate. I told everyone before the season he's going to go scorched earth. He did it last week. He's going to continue it here Monday night against Washington. So that takes care of these picks of the segment. A couple interesting topics I got to talk about here because NFL, just when you think the NFL rules can't get any more flat stupid, they find a way to get more flat stupid. And I mean, not just stupid. We're talking flat stupid. I mean, there's the next level of stupid when you talk about this. Now they're talking about utilizing what they use in the XFL, the 4th and 15 as an onside kick alternative. You guys know the 4th and 15, they just throw a crazy pass on a 4th and 15. They get the first down, they get the ball, or whatever the frick that rule is over there. Good luck trying to make this thing work because you're talking about a more structured league who will be prepared for something like this. And just the concept of it isn't going to get anybody anywhere. I mean, they already screwed up enough things with the NFL. They already just ruined the great product it was for the longest time by being just flat stupid many times. And just when you think they couldn't get to the next level of flat stupid, they find a way and they did it again. And that's what we have here with this particular rule proposal. Now, I don't know if it's going to go through or not. There's no vote. You're going to need 24 of the 32 owners to vote for it. But basically, there's other rules on top of it. They're talking about, players are going to return from injured reserve, among many others. I'm looking at this right away. Expand defenses, player protection, which is something, it's still touchy because no one knows what the real definition of that is. And talking about multiple dead fouls while the clock is running, which is some weird circumstance. It takes about draining the clock with less than 5 minutes left, just punting the ball instead of just killing the clock. Just when you think the NFL rules can't get any more flat stupid, they find a way to get more flat stupid. And if they go through with this, they will go to the next level of flat stupid. And the other one is this one they should just do away with. I mean, the Pro Bowl. I mean, now they're moving it to San Francisco the week of the Super Bowl, which is the Super Bowl is taking place over there at Levi Stadium in San Fran. And now they're talking about making it to the week of the Super Bowl. And my guess to this is I don't know where it's going to get you. They're trying to use this as a way to boost fan engagement to prop up what's going to take place in the flag football Olympics in 2028, which I don't know what that's all about. But that's what they're trying to try to do with this. The Pro Bowl product has been dead for about at least 2 decades. And it's been the definition of dead. You might as well just axe it. I mean, that's what it's come down to. I mean, it's not even football. I don't even consider it flag football. I don't even know what it is. I mean, I don't even think it's Madden. That's how bad the Pro Bowl has gotten. Why don't you just do away with it altogether because you're not getting anything done out of it. I mean, you want to have your skills competitions, have at it. Actually, they need to do what they used to do at the back end of the 90s. They had the old quarterback club skills challenge where they had all the standout quarterbacks testing their quarterback skills. Why don't you do something like that? The Pro Bowl product has been dead for the longest time. Why don't you just kill it? I mean, it should be just flat out dead now. It's just an embarrassment. Getting a Pro Bowl recognition doesn't mean as much as it did once upon a time because we know when some people get it, they find a way to check out. And we get players who have no business being in the Pro Bowl, being in there because nobody wants to be there. That should tell you how embarrassing the Pro Bowl product has become. Do away with it. Be done with it because it's basically not worth watching. The game is just a flat-out embarrassment. Just like the NBA All-Star Game will just ruin that product. Maybe baseball has baseball and hockey have their All-Star Game that still has their tradition to it still after all these years. But the Pro Bowl and the NBA All-Star Game, they just flat out do away with because it's just an embarrassment at this point. Especially the Pro Bowl. Hasn't had credibility since maybe the mid-2000s. Now we're going to go to the world of boxing before I jump into the main event. Let's start with one that took place 63 years ago tonight at the Candlestick Park in San Francisco. It was the long reign of Gene Fullmer that ended against Dick Tiger. One of the pure brawlers of his time. When you talk about Gene Fullmer, two-time world middleweight champion, won it by beating the great Sugar Ray Robinson in his 41st pro fight in 57. Lost it at less than 4 months to the same Sugar Ray Robinson, where he was a starch in 5 rounds. And after an extensive winning streak, he came back and beat the standout Carmen Basilio to regain the middleweight championship and made up to 7 successful title defenses before he fought the standout out of Nigeria, Dick Tiger. Born as Richard Iyehu, as I said the other night, went from Nigeria to London to pursue his career. When you think about Dick Tiger, one of the chiseled stone guys that was hard to move. You want to talk about an immovable object? That was Dick Tiger. You want to talk about an irresistible force? That was Gene Fullmer. And this was a first of a trilogy. And we talk about this particular fight. I mean, whenever you had a Gene Fullmer fight, you always had blood and guts. And that's what Gene Fullmer had. And he and Dick Tiger, the irresistible force and the immovable object, went at it for the better half of the first 9.5 to 10 rounds. It was basically a pick-em fight at that point. By the end of the 4th or 5th round, Dick Tiger basically told his cornerman, I knew I'm messing with a champion. And that was how respected Gene Fullmer was for the longest time. But as the fight was going on, as Gene Fullmer started to wear down with his aggressive style, because there was a case now of Tiger making Fullmer miss and making a pay with one of his strong suits, which was counterpunching. He started to take control and started to pull away. And as he was starting to take control, the heavy hands of Dick Tiger started to show. And as a result, Fullmer started to take a beating. And it's the case of all Gene Fullmer fights. He always has blood all over himself. And that's what started to happen. The precision punching, the strength of Dick Tiger took over as rounds 11 through 15 came around as the fight was going on. And basically in a 9-4-2 decision, it was Dick Tiger who would win the first of this trilogy via unanimous decision to win the first of his 2 world middleweight championships. Dick Tiger, as a middleweight, strong as it got. And Gene Fullmer found out the hard way. Now, of course, it was the downturn of Gene Fullmer's career. That's what happens with the sport. He tried everything against this upstart Dick Tiger, but just had no answers. Gene Fullmer was a guy, whenever he got in that ring, you got the honest effort out of. But it was basically a case of skill versus will, and the skill of Dick Tiger, and you can probably say will also, because he had a lot of will just as much as Fullmer did, took over, and it showed in the later rounds because Fullmer was tired, he was gassed, and just like in all Fullmer fights, he started to take a beating. And it basically was it for Gene Fullmer. After losing this title, as I said, he and Tiger had 2 more fights for the same championship. The second fight was a case of a fight that could have gone either way, which resulted in a draw. But the third fight, they went back to the home country of Nigeria, which is the home of Dick Tiger. And Tiger just laid a beating to where Gene Fullmer quit on the stool, but it was his last fight. He essentially retired because it turned out to be retired for good because it was his last fight, as Gene Fullmer lost that trilogy to the great Dick Tiger. As I said the other night, we talk about Dick Tiger, an underrated all-time great that's not talked about enough, and in that middleweight class, certainly in the top 10. The bottom half of it, more than likely, because the top half is a bunch of who's who. We talk about Sugar Ray Robinson, Carlos Monzon, Jake LaMotta, Harry Greb, Mickey Walker, Marvin Hagler, even a guy like Bernard Hopkins. And he's in that conversation for sure. A couple of other guys I could throw in there. But Dick Tiger was one of those guys, had the style to compete with anyone in any era because he was strong. I mean, he chiseled out of stone. I said, look up the images of Dick Tiger on YouTube. Very, very chiseled, very disciplined in the ring, worked at his craft, knew what he could do, maximize it to his strengths, and he did it to become the middleweight champ on this night 63 years ago at the Candlestick Park in San Francisco when he beat the all-time great middleweight Gene Fullmer, who himself is among the all-time great middleweights himself, 2-time world champion, and just gave exciting fights after exciting fights. Managed to, before the 3 losses to Dick Tiger, managed to get another win over Sugar Ray Robinson and even another win over Carmen Basilio, which says a whole lot considering the nature that we talk about with Robinson and Basilio. Tells you how great Gene Fullmer was. Just when he ran into an upstart like Dick Tiger, the gas tank went to empty, and Dick Tiger seized the opportunity. Now we're going to go to, speaking of great middleweights who made their mark, we're going to what took place over 36 years ago overseas in Italy. This was Sumbu Kalambay versus Iran Barkley. When you talk about this fight, this was the beginning of the mess of the middleweight division after Marvin Hagler ruled the roost. And we know how Marvin Hagler ruled the roost as the undisputed middleweight champ. Belts were, stripped all over the place. I mean, Hagler was stripped because he wouldn't fight Harold Graham, who was undeserving of a #1 contendership at the time, because shortly thereafter, it was Kalambay who beat Graham to get this title shot against an Iran Barkley, who, climbed up the rankings the hard way, out of the Bronx in New York City, fighting out of Gleason's gym. And the story of this fight, nothing much to talk about, is the fact that the skill level of Sumbu Kalambay just outdid the pure brawling style of Iran Barkley. And to the stun of many, Barkley just conceded at times to the style of Kalambay instead of going all in like he did when he knocked out guys like Tommy Hearns and Michael Elijah. You would think that would be what he needed to do to beat Sumbu Kalambay, which didn't happen. Sumbu Kalambay, for that time, was that kind of a guy nobody wanted to mess with because he had the style to make you look bad. I mean, that's how good of a fighter Sumbu Kalambay was. And he had himself one of the more underrated resumes for that time when we talk about some of the guys he beat. And we talked about Harold Graham and Iran Barkley, Robbie Sims, Doug DeWitt, who won a title at one point. Also fought a second fight with Mike McCallum, beat Steve Collins, one of the premier fighters of the UK area. We talk about Ireland and England and Scotland. And one of the more underrated fighters, and we talk about what's coming up in the Hall of Fame ballot. And when it comes to Sumbu Kalambay, and this is a hot topic, two of the guys he beat, Mike McCallum and Iran Barkley, are in the Hall of Fame. And Sumbu Kalambay has as much of a as accomplished career, especially we talk about fighters out of Italy, as many of them, and he's always left off the ballot. The problem I've said all along was never who's in and who's not in. It's how the process works, because it's always inverted, diverted, and cross-verted, however you want to say it. Because I don't get how this guy is not on the ballot. We consider the accomplishments he had. I mean, he had big win after big win after big win. I mean, the only thing he did wrong was get pasted by Michael Nunn in '89. But it was one of those punches where it was a punch of perfection that Michael Nunn could knock anybody out that night with. Sumbu Kalambay was just a victim of it. But you look at the career of Sumbu Kalambay, just as good as no one's going to put him in the upper plethora of all-time great middleweights. Nobody is. But when you talk about the standards that the Hall of Fame process has, especially in boxing, which is different from, say, football or basketball or baseball, for this guy to be totally omitted and his greatness to be totally overlooked is a major crime to him. And it calls a lot of questions as to how this guy is not on the ballot. And two of the guys he beat, Mike McCallum and Iran Barkley, are in there. And they were all-time greats. Multiple division world champs. You know, big wins for both. We talk about Barkley over Tommy Hearns twice. Mike McCallum over guys like Donald Curry and Jeff Harding, and even Sumbu Kalambay in a rematch. The hypocrisy of the Boxing Hall of Fame, especially when we talk about the low bar, sometimes rears itself, and the boxing community sees it. And it is just a terrible look all the way around. And Sumbu Kalambay showed why he belongs. We talk about what he did over 30 some odd years ago over in his home country of Italy by decisioning Iran Barkley, just putting on a beautiful display of boxing skill. And he was a guy that none of the top guys wanted to fight because he had that style to make you look bad. And granted, it came after the Four Kings basically was done. I said the Four Kings era was done after the Leonard Hagler fight, because Hagler basically retired, and the other three fighters were just there for namesake. And we talk about Sumbu Kalambay being left off the Hall of Fame ballot. It says more about how crooked and how hypocritical the Boxing Hall of Fame process is. I'm not saying there's some guys in there that there's some fighters in there. I'm not going to go into a name dropping contest that shouldn't be there. I'm not going to go that far because I can save a show for that. But we talk about what was happening over the last few years and some of the guys that have been put in there. That bar has gone way low. It is time for that thing to rise up and start to take notes and get this thing right. It's something the boxing community has called for the longest time, how this guy is not a part of the Hall of Fame ballot. And it's a crime. Vastly underrated middleweight. I mean, came around at a weird time, which is the back end of the Four Kings era, but still a solid run as a middleweight champion. When you talk about beating Iran Barkley, defending it 3 times, the only reason he lost the title is because of boxing politics. I mean, they put Harold Graham as the mandatory contender, the same Harold Graham that Sumbu Kalambay beat in Graham's backyard of London, England at Wembley Stadium. And it wasn't even close. I mean, he basically gave him a boxing lesson. And basically, Sumbu Kalambay had the greatest quote of all time. It's the fighter that makes the belt, and it's not the belt that makes a fighter. Because that's what he said after he was stripped prior to the Michael Nunn loss, because it was supposed to be a middleweight unification. The governing body showed its butt on that particular situation. And one last thing before, and I wrap it up on this particular topic, because everybody talks about 12 or 15-round fights. This was the last 15-round fight of this particular governing body between Kalambay and Barkley. We know they've gone to 12 rounds ever since. Lots of reasons for it. I always said traced back to what took place in that unfortunate circumstance 5.5 years before with Ray Mancini and Duk Koo Kim, which we know what happened with that one. But Sumbu Kalambay needs to be on the ballot, at least. I mean, doesn't mean he's going to go in. I don't know. He needs to be on the ballot. If you're going to put fighters on the ballot that have people raising their eyebrows over, how come is this guy getting overlooked? And that's another topic I'll touch on when it comes to the Hall of Fame process here shortly. And now the undercard is set And now we're ready for the main event. And this goes to everybody here in Cincinnati, because everybody knows what happened to Boston 50 years ago tonight. The Great Eight, the Big Red Machine, reached the pinnacle on the first of back-to-back. It was the Cincinnati Reds beating the Boston Red Sox 4-3 to win the first of their 2 World Series. The Great Eight, we know who they are. Dave Concepcion, Pete Rose, Ken Griffey Sr., Tony Perez, and we talk about guys like Johnny Bench, and of course Johnny Bench and Joe Morgan. I can't remember the other top of my head. It's my blank. But we talk about the Great Eight. Of course, George Foster. By the way, I have a George Foster picture in my bedroom. I'll post it for everyone who is not following me on the X and Facebook platforms. And of course, Cesar Geronimo, forever known as the Great Eight. Good luck trying to pitch around that. And we know the story of what happened to this one. Let's put this in perspective a little bit. Before this, how they got to this point. They lost a 1970 World Series to the Baltimore Orioles under odd circumstances. We know that. They also managed to finish the next year, 71, missed the playoffs. 1972, managed to get to the World Series, lost 4-3 to the Oakland Athletics. The next year, went 98 and 64, but finished second to the Los Angeles Dodgers. And of course, which brings us to the 1975 season, the first of the back-to-back run. The real story of this one took place real early in the season when the Cincinnati Reds started out at 500, 12-12, looked like they were not going anywhere. And the manager, Sparky Anderson, made a subtle move. It basically, after the Reds were at that 12 mark, knowing a change was needed, Sparky Anderson basically told at that time the third baseman, John Vukovich, you need to sit down. A fellow named Pete Rose was inserted into his place. And the rest is history. They managed to win 96 of the next 100 plus games to finish 108 and 54 to have the best record in the National League West. Am I just before the National League Central in 90? Back then, the Reds were part of the National League West. Odd, I get it, but they were part of the National League West. Far and away the best team in that division. And we talk about this run. Of course, they won the National League pennant by bringing the brooms to the Pittsburgh Pirates, and which led to, arguably, what's widely considered at the time the greatest World Series ever. And we talk about what took place game for game on this one. It was, of course, the Reds and the Red Sox. I could point every way out possible. Outstanding pitching by Boston. The Great Eight of the Cincinnati Reds, Big Red Machine. The Boston, of course, jumps out of the gates with the 1-0 lead. The starter Luis Tiant gets allows us 5 hits in the 5-0 shutout. But the Reds came back into game 2 to steal home field advantage, especially on a clutch double by Ken Griffey Sr. So now we come to Cincinnati, and again Boston. The Reds had a duel. Turned out to be at the bottom of the 10th, a sacrifice bunt that failed. And basically what happened was, at the end of the day, forever known as an Amberster incident, where Ed Amberster tried to lay down a sacrifice bunt, and basically he got tangled up with the outfielder Carlton Fisk, and which leaving runners on second and third, and basically it turned out to a hot mess. And the game ended with a Joe Morgan RBI single. And we fast forward to game 4. Again, Tyant, the winner of game 1, basically pitched closest thing to a gem of the not as good as the first game, but he pitched a solid game, allowed a couple runs in the first and fourth innings, but still managed to win game 4 to even the series there. But it was Cincinnati with a 2 home run game by Tony Perez to go up in game 5 to win 6-2 to go up 3-2 heading to Boston. And then the classic begins. We talk about game 6, the 3-run home run by Fred Lynn to put the Red Sox up 3-0. But Cincinnati just pounded runs as they took with runs in the 5th, 7th, and 8th innings to go up 6-3. But then, of course, the 3-run home run by Bernie Carbo to tie it. And of course, we go to after 11 innings, it was 6-6. And maybe the most iconic walk-off moment in World Series history at the time, it was Carlton Fisk of the Boston Red Sox with the game-winning walk-off home run. Let's call it wheeling the ball, which he basically wheeled the ball fair. Everybody knows what he did on first base, just pushed the ball out at the first base marker to send Boston home the series tied 3-3. Now we get to the classic, and it was Game 7. It was Carlo Yastrzemski's RBI single and a couple of low bases loaded walks that allowed Boston to take the 3-0 lead. Looked like they were going to win this the game and the series. But a 2-run home run by Tony Perez and a Pete Rose RBI single tied it in the 7th. And at the top of the 9th with no outs, Joe Morgan, clutch hit that basically second deciding hit, and the RBI single that scored Ken Griffey Sr. And Will McEnany came on to retire the bottom of the 9th to clinch the 1975 World Series for the Cincinnati Reds. It was probably one of the all-time classic series in baseball history. And it was set 50 years ago tonight at Fenway Park in Boston, Massachusetts, that the 1975 World Series championship belonged to the Cincinnati Reds. And that's what happened. And what was an epic classic. We talk about this great. Let's just point this with the great 8 first. Let's think about this for a second. Collectively, we talk about the 2 years they had won it all in 75 and 76. I mean, they played a grand total of 88 games together. They were 69 and 19 in those 88 games. When you talk about the Big 8 playing as the Big 8, think about it: 69 and 19 during a 2-year period. I mean, think about all of the all-star selections, MVPs. Think about this for a second with these 8 guys first. And I'm going to break this down real quick. 6 National League MVP selections, 4 National League home run leaders, 3 National League batting champions, and 8 players collectively collected a collected total of 25 Golden Gloves and made 63 All-Star game appearances. You're not going to see anything like that in Major League Baseball history, ever. That tells you what this was 50 years ago and what they had cooking from start to finish. Especially when we consider the subtle move that took place in after the 12-12 start of Sparky Anderson sitting down John Vukovic, who was struggling badly and couldn't hit on the other side of the barn. I mean, you could put a tee ball for John Vukovic to hit, and he couldn't hit it. So you bring this guy named Pete Rose in, and the rest is history. That's a subtle move that Sparky Anderson made and delivered the goods. And we talk about what these guys did. The first inception of this was May 9th, 1975, and through the end of the 76 season, and they were just doing anything they want to. Look at that lineup. Good luck trying to pitch around it. That great 8 is as good as anyone in baseball history. I mean, everybody plays hypotheticals. I don't do it because I think it's just absolutely ignorant. But when you talk about the accomplishments of these 8 guys, these 8 standout guys, it's harder for me to fathom, or at least for me to come up with, an 8 lineup with the career accolades and the type of firepower they possess. And it wasn't the fact that they won this World Series against Boston. They won it against Boston at times where it looked like Boston had total control of the World Series, and the Reds this team showed collective heart. We talk about what took place 50 years ago. I mean, they could have simply thrown in the towel after going down 3-0 to the Boston Red Sox in Game 7. And it looked like it was it. But Tony Perez started everything. Pete Rose had other ideas. And, of course, he had other ideas later on. And, of course, Joe Morgan with the clutch single that scored the go-ahead run. And Will McEnany just retired the side. This Cincinnati Big Red Machine wasn't just winning games. They were winning every single which way possible, from ahead, from behind. looked like they had the game under control, looked like they were going to lose a game. They were finding ways to win, and they were driven to finish the 1975 season at Fenway Park with the World Series, and that's what happened. Now we talk about two of these players, or I consider two of the Cincinnati icons that come through the city of Cincinnati. That's being Johnny Bench and Joe Morgan. Let's talk. We're going to jump into Johnny Bench here real quick. A distinction that's considered throughout the baseball community as the greatest catcher of all time. Again, I don't partake in it because I don't know what the set criteria is. But when you look at what this guy did in his career, think about this. Not that the two-time World Series champion in 75 and 76 was actually the World Series MVP in 76 when he just put numbers off the charts. I mean, when I talk to next year on his run, you bring up the numbers. He was off the charts in the 76 World Series. I mean, 1968 Rookie of the Year, not two-time National League MVP in 70 and 72, 14-time All-Star, 10-time Golden Glove winner, and basically a first ballot Hall of Famer in 1989, which that was a no-brainer. I mean, we talk about the numbers he left during his time here in Cincinnati. And this is why I call him the greatest Red ever. I mean, a 267 batting average. I mean, for a catcher, that was pretty darn good at the time. Nearly 400 home runs, close to 1,400 RBIs, an on-base percentage of 342, slugging percentage of 476, but an on-base slugging percentage of 817 for a catcher. Think about it. An on-base percentage of on-base plus slugging percentage OPS of 817 for a catcher. Think about that for a second. And of course, the 2,048 hits and 1,091 RBIs. And we talk about those numbers for a catcher. It was head and shoulders above everybody else at the time. Again, I don't partake in the greatest ever because I know Yankees fans are going to throw out Yogi Berra. I understand it. But we talk about his place just in general of the catcher position in baseball. I mean, there's a boatload of them. Actually, his counterpart in that World Series, Carlton Fisk. I mean, as good as anyone, as good of a hitter as a catcher as Johnny Bench was. I mean, the walk-off in Game 6 of that World Series. That tells you a lot about Carlton Fisk. Of course, we mentioned Yogi Berra. The career accolades speak for itself. Gary Carter of the Montreal Expos, a terrific one. Some had him, anointed him the greatest catcher of all time. Thurman Munson of the Yankees. This is even before Yogi Berra. If you go a little more modern, because it's where after Johnny Bench's run, the catcher position started to evolve a lot more. We talk about guys like Mike Piazza, Ivan Rodriguez, Buster Posey, Yadier Molina, Jorge Posada. List goes on and on. Ted Simmons is another great one. And just a great, deep list of catchers who brought a lot to the table. And when Johnny Bench came in, the catcher position really evolved. And Johnny Bench, and anything he do, you should give credit to Johnny Bench because he was a trendsetter in that regard. Because we talk about what he did throughout his career as a Cincinnati Red, at the catcher position, second to none. I mean, people are going to anoint him at the position. I'll go with it. I don't like to partake in the discussion because I need to know the criteria. But we think about what he did with all the numbers I mentioned not too long ago for his 14-year career here in Cincinnati. Maybe he does have the deserved recognition and the distinction of the greatest catcher to play Major League Baseball ever. And there will be nothing like Johnny Bench. When you think of some of the catchers that came after him, Johnny Bench basically opened a lot of doors, and a lot of kids emulated their games after Johnny Bench. Yeah, Johnny Bench was a different person, not off the field. I'll acknowledge I met him in 2008 when I used to manage a restaurant. I mean, at least he shook my hand. I'll give him that. But Johnny Bench, arguably the greatest catcher in baseball history. Again, everyone's up for discussion. What he did for the 2-year run, and started 50 years ago tonight, when he was a key piece of that Cincinnati Reds big red machine that won the 1975 World Series. Career accolades speak for itself. Now I'm going to side to his sidekick, Joe Morgan, another Cincinnati icon. Now we talk about this guy's career. I mean, he played for multiple teams. We know that. But his peak years were obviously here in Cincinnati, and that's a no-brainer. I mean, we talk about what he did here. Two-time World Series we talked about. Actually, the years of 75 and 76 was a National League Most Valuable Player. a 10-time All-Star from 72 to 79, 5-time Golden Glove winner from 73 to 77. Of course, first year of eligibility, Hall of Famer, that's a no-brainer. In the discussion of the greatest second baseman of all time, of course, the gold standard wasn't always will be Rogers Hornsby. I mean, he'll always be the greatest second baseman of all time, in my opinion. Morgan has a strong case. His years in Cincinnati compared very well to a lot of them, a lot of other catchers. We just isolate his years here. And the guy was just a phenom. And that's, you talk about some of the great second basemen of all time. Of course, Jackie Robinson. We know the story with that one. Ryan Sandberg, probably the greatest Chicago Cub of all time, or at least the top 5 of that franchise. Held that second baseman down for the longest time. It was a tough out for anybody who was on the mound trying to pitch against him. Of course, Rod Carew of the Minnesota Twins. Go down the list here. At least one here, list here. Go back to a guy like Willie Randolph. Maybe if you go a little more modern, maybe a guy like, of course, Robinson Cano of the Yankees was pretty good for a while. Go back, a guy like Lou Whitaker of the Detroit Tigers. He was a good one. Craig Biggio of the Houston Astros, a part of the Killer Bees with Jeff Bagwell in the mid-'90s, when the Astros and the Reds at one point were jostling back and forth for the NL Central Championship back then. And it was actually a good rivalry between the Reds and the Astros. Actually, it was such a hated rivalry at one point. Ron Gant took a fist and pushed it through the mask of a Houston Astros catcher. I don't know how the hell he got the fist through there. So that should tell you the Reds and Astros rivalry and how great Craig Biggio was a part of that situation. Bill Mazeroski is another one you could talk about. And list goes on. Joe Morgan is in that conversation. I mean, but the gold standard will always be Rogers Hornsby, and that's a no-brainer. Rogers Hornsby is the greatest second baseman to ever step on the baseball field. I mean, I get why some fans want to throw other names out there, but it's still going to be Rogers Hornsby until baseball ceases to exist. But Joe Morgan isn't that far behind. We talk about his years here in Cincinnati. And he had his 5 years in Cincinnati, or his time here, second to none, was as good as anybody. I mean, you don't become a 2-time National League MVP by just being someone just sitting on the bench. Joe Morgan was every bit the reason why they went back-to-back. Even Johnny Bench said after Joe Morgan's passing, there's no big red machine, and we're not going back-to-back without Joe Morgan. Especially when we talk about the game, we talk about the 2 moments in this particular World Series. As we go back here in a minute, if you look at the 2 moments he had in this World Series, 2 game-winning RBIs, one of them especially in Game 3 after the Ambrister incident, and of course the go-ahead at Game 7 at Fenway Park in Boston, which basically was the end-all, be-all. Joe Morgan, certainly a Cincinnati icon. Of course, career translated greatly to the booth, where he and John Miller was a part of the standout ESPN Sunday Night Baseball for the longest time, when that platform and that program was the program to watch baseball at a time when it was worth watching. And Joe Morgan was one of the pioneers who transitioned from the mound to the playing field to the booth and did a phenomenal job. Of course, had some time in the booth here in Cincinnati on the back end of his life before he passed. But certainly a Cincinnati icon like Johnny Bench. And what those two did 50 years ago today, a part of that deep great 8 to rally from behind, to show heart, to beat the Boston Red Sox to clinch the 1975 World Series. Their place in history forever secure. And let me just remind everybody here in Cincinnati one thing before I wrap this up, because there's a lot of delusionalism when it comes to this. There's only one great team in Cincinnati sports history. That's a Big Red Machine, the Great 8. There is no number 2. There's one and one only. That's a Big Red Machine. And they're so far above the stratosphere, nobody can see them out of the naked eye. That's how far ahead the Big Red Machine is when you talk about Cincinnati sports. So far ahead, they can't see anybody out of the rearview mirror, especially when we talk about everything they did for that 2-year period in 75 and 76. There is no number 2 team in Cincinnati ever. There's only one and one only, the Big Red Machine. There's no Cincinnati Bengals team. I mean, the Bengals fans would have their delusionalism. There's no FC Cincinnati team. Forget that. There's no I mean, you talk about Ezra Charles and Aaron Pryor, individual athletes and Cincinnati icons. Great. Oscar Robertson. Great. But as a Cincinnati sports team, there is one and one only, the Big Red Machine. So far in the stratosphere, there is no number two. So don't have a ranking of the greatest Cincinnati sports teams ever, because it's only one answer, and one answer only. The Big Red Machine. And it was 50 years ago tonight at Fenway Park in Boston, Massachusetts, at Game 7, after being down 3-0 with 2 home runs by Tony Perez. A single hit by Pete Rose that scored a game-tying run. And a game go-ahead RBI by John Morgan that scored Ken Griffey Sr. And the retirement of the side by Will McEnany to clinch the 1975 World Series for the Cincinnati Reds, and the first of their 2 awesome World Series back-to-back. And that's 1975 World Series, certainly one for the ages. And it was a lot of momentum shifts back and forth both ways. Looked like for a minute the Red Sox started out control. Reds looked like they stepped it back. Red Sox looked like they stepped it back. Then the Reds. Then, of course, we know with the Carlton Fisk home run in Game 6. And the capper was what took place 50 years ago tonight. And as Marty Brennaman would perfectly say, your 1975 World Series championship belongs to the Cincinnati Reds. Rest is history. You guys in Cincinnati need to appreciate that, because when you talk about Cincinnati sports, you don't talk about anything else. It's only one thing and one thing only: the Big Red Machine. Plain and simple. And everybody here, don't even try to put anything in that stratosphere, because you're just a moron otherwise. I mean, that's the Big Red Machine. I mean, the Great 8. Cesar Geronimo, Dave Concepcion, Ken Griffey Sr., George Foster, Tony Perez, Pete Rose, and the 2 Cincinnati icons, Joe Morgan and Johnny Bench. Good luck trying to pitch around that. And after failures in the first part of the 70s, they cemented their place in baseball history by going back-to-back in 75 and 76. How they did it? With heart, desire, will to win, skilled players at skilled positions, a terrific manager like Sparky Anderson, who knew how to push the right buttons, and the rest is history. The greatest moment in Cincinnati sports history. You had the greatest moment in Cincinnati 40 years ago with Pete Rose going 4-1-9-2. But in all of Cincinnati sports, all of them, I don't care what it is, number one is, wasn't, always will be what took place 50 years ago, and nothing will ever top that. And on that note, this will wrap up this historical edition of Sirhan on X. I never thought I'd have to cross the baseball field. I did something right, I guess. I mean, if you want to say I failed, have at it. As always, if you missed any part of this show, you can catch any of this show or any other ones on the iHeartRadio and Apple apps. If you guys have listened to the audio versions, want to catch the video version, you can catch it on the Spotify app. And as always, make self-care your number one priority in all walks of life. If you take care of yourself first, all the good things will come your way. Focus on you, take care of you, good things will come. If you don't focus on yourself first, nothing else matters. Tomorrow night, it is a one-hit wonder versus a driven warrior, and a night of wild circumstances. I will focus on that tomorrow night. On that note, have a good rest of the night. Take care of yourself. God bless. Enjoy the evening. I'll see you tomorrow.